Welcome back, everyone. My name is Tim Block. I'm a director in the Southeast Market Office for Enterprise Community Partners, and I am one of the co-moderators for our second panel. And I'll turn it to Betty to introduce herself.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. This is Betty Fong, calling in from the New York Market Office for Enterprise Community Partners, where I serve as a program officer. Today's panel is on meeting community needs, approaches to home ownership and community facilities development. I'll be introducing our great panelists now. From New York City, we are joined by Arshad Bacchus from Nehemiah HDFC. From Atlanta, we are joined by Ralph Cook Jr. from Cityscape Housing. From Washington, D.C., we are joined by two panelists, Veronica Harrison from Israel Manor Incorporated and Ray Nix from Nix Development Company. And from Miami, we are joined by Reverend Dr. Joaquin Willis from the Collective Empowerment Group of South Florida. Welcome in, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you.
Be here. Hello. Thank you. Good to be here.
So we'll begin our conversation today after hearing from the fireside chat from panel one around the importance of community engagement, as well as the congregation and the church thinking through what are the possible uses with our land, our property, how are we generating and building wealth in our communities. That is the focus of our conversation today. And I'd like to pose this first question to the panel around your organization's decision to build affordable housing, specifically home ownership units and community spaces, community facilities. So to the panelists, and folks, feel free to jump in. What informed your decision to build home ownership units and these community facilities? Was community engagement involved? Was there a formal needs assessment that was conducted? So I'll open us up today with that question.
I'm happy to take a first crack at it. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Timothy, and thank you to the Enterprise team for hosting us. Our first set of homeownership homes were developed in the 70s and the 80s in East New York. And you could drive the streets and you can tell that there is a need for homeownership. It was as clear as day. There was tremendous disinvestment. There was tremendous blight. These were streets that you didn't want to drive through, much less live in. So the idea and the need for homeownership was there and was clear, and it was actually came about from our member churches that decided they will stand their ground. They will not leave these neighborhoods. They will not let it dilapidate and fall into crime. And so they decided collectively to form an organization called the East Brooklyn Congregation, and together started to pursue homeownership for the neighborhoods. So to directly answer, no, there was no formal needs assessment. The need was just there. And although you can drive around many neighborhoods in New York and nationally today, and you may not still vividly see it with your eyes, we created 6,000 units over the last 40 years, and we're still in a housing crisis. And the country is still in a housing crisis. And we don't need a needs assessment. We don't need to see it in front of our eyes, because we know it, we hear it, we feel it. The members of our churches, the member of our congregations know and can feel the impact of lack of housing.
I would add that for us, it was the obvious assessment of the lack of Black wealth. We felt that in very intentional terms, that we know from statistics that for Black enterprise in particular, many of those businesses that started as a second mortgage or some sort of loan against the home, number one. Number two, we know it's a housing crisis, and in Miami, there was a tremendous surge of building for rental properties, and rental properties do not enhance or create generational wealth. And in fact, oddly enough, it could create a crisis for the family if someone loses their job and no one in the house is able to take over that rent. They're all out. And so we're very clear in the Collective Empowerment Group of South Florida that we've been appealing to the churches now for almost 18, 19 years, asking them to consider using some of their properties to build affordable for sale homes, as well as considering rental. Some of them will end up doing rentals, and we do need transitions in that case, where we could build transitional rentals for people into homeownership. And we do have one church that's looking at and has made a commitment to slice off a few acres to put up 40 for sale townhomes on their property. But others are looking at rentals, clinics, schools. I really appreciated what I heard earlier in the session about starting at the gates. And someone else made the comment about child development if you don't have anything going on. So we're partnering with child development organizations, clinics, health organizations, food suppliers to potentially put those type of businesses on church campuses as well, creating jobs and solutions for the food desert crisis, some environmental issues, and generally building leadership in the community as well. So those were some of our motives.
Good afternoon. I'll jump in if that's still okay, Betty. Just coming from a little different perspective, we worked with a lot of faith-based institutions, houses of worship, church CDCs on homeownership products and communities in DC. Probably the most recent is a project that we did in the Northeast section, the Deanwood community in Washington, where Beulah Baptist Church lost a few children of the congregation and decided they had had enough. And because they were true community stakeholders that actually walked to church, they decided to kind of walk the neighborhood and take back their streets, as they termed it to me. They did their own physical inventory of the vacant lots. They described it to me as like boxer's teeth, a couple houses here, a couple vacant lots here, a couple houses here, dilapidated apartment buildings, took that data to the DC Office of Planning and worked with the district government to come up with a strategy on a revitalization approach to their neighborhood. And from that, we identified a dilapidated apartment building that was formerly Section 8, but bad things had started happening. Went through a public procurement process. We were chosen by the church to partner with them. And we developed a plan for 29 townhomes for first-time home buyers, which completely changed the entire streetscape of that street and started an equity building campaign for that neighborhood. And now, you go through Northeast DC, as a lot of these emerging neighborhoods, and you start to see all of these different, individual pop-ups coming up in between on the vacant lots. People are starting to find the neighborhoods. So that was an example, which I was very impressed by the church kind of stepping out and doing their own inventory of their community.
Ray, I'll jump in next. Betty, to answer your question, I just heard from something very similar from Pastor Willis. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ralph Cook, and I'm with Cityscape Housing in Atlanta, Georgia. My partner, Rob Jones, and I, we focused on how we could impact our community, and we started doing research back in 2013. And along with what Pastor Willis has shared, we wanted to be able to address the inequality and the wealth gap. And we were very intentional about that. We started to look at various sources of capital first, because we knew capital sort of drove everything. We had unique backgrounds. I was a lawyer, and then we got into some federal consulting, and we helped cities across the Southeast in the economic growth. And so we saw a lot from that purview. And so when we wanted to get involved with, impacting our community, we chose housing in order to do that. Home ownership, as you know, is one of those areas that is one of really 4 areas specifically in minority communities that can create wealth and start closing that gap. And we put together unique sort of, tools in order to do that. Yes, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this soon. We've done development projects with the faith-based community. We also work with mission-oriented. I should say all of our partners are mission-oriented around affordable housing, workforce housing. But I think just in short to say what drove us to be in this space, because I think everyone on this call understands that you choose to be in this space. There are other things that you can do if you are looking to make money, but if you're looking to make an impact, this is what you choose to do. So I think between a choice and the type of impact we wanted to make, this is why we're in this particular industry.
So I'd like to loop us back to Washington, D.C. Really, the impetus for our building was just simply the vision and extreme passion of the late Reverend Dr. Morris L. Sharon Sr., who was the senior pastor of the House of Worship to which we are affiliated, Israel Baptist Church. He was by far the single and the most powerful influence on our decision to move forward on what became a faith journey to build affordable housing. This decision did not at all come easily, as the organization was in the throes of pre-development efforts on a 42,000-foot community learning center. At the time when the decision was also made for this entity, the church, to simultaneously embark on building affordable housing complex. Needless to say, doubt reigned high among the congregation, among the community. Was this organization going to be able to pull this off? Were we moving into a circumstance where we were going to end up building something partially in the community and then abandoning it and leaving thus greater devastation to the community? Nonetheless, similar, I believe, Arshad said it earlier, we didn't need a needs assessment. We lived the housing crises in Washington, D.C., and in particular, the housing crisis for our senior residents and those residents over projection from the comprehensive plan, where DC was essentially aging out, and with its aging out was also pushing a number of its native residences to outlying areas because they simply could not afford to live where they grew up, where their children grew up, where their grandchildren grew up. So we didn't need the needs assessment, but we were grateful that we were already heavily engaged with communities, with enterprise, and you certainly could not even be here today without the support of enterprise, our government agencies, local agencies, and most importantly, the advisory neighborhood commissions that supported us from a community perspective. Reverend Sharon was an amazing man, charismatic man, and fundamentally galvanized the entire community that allowed us to move forward and ultimately realize success in something that we ourselves doubted that we could actually pull off.
Thanks so much, Veronica. Thank you, panelists. Just reflecting on what I'm hearing from you all, I think Arshad and Veronica, you both speak to the commitment for neighborhood residents to stay in the neighborhood, for there to be church leadership, faith leadership, who is really committed to carrying out a development project like this, to see the vision and to bring community, to bring the right agencies, the right experts like Ray and Ralph are talking about in their processes into their development project and vision. And I think, Pastor Willis, with what you said around the marriage of not just building housing units, but how's that married with the community services to be provided in food, in the environment in the neighborhood for the youth who are going to grow up in that community and neighborhood. These are all parts of the pieces to making the decision and being able to follow through with that decision to develop what your organizations had in mind. So thank you all for sharing that. I will hone in on what some folks are already mentioning around how homeownership is really this tool, especially in Black communities and communities of color, to build wealth and retain it in the family, in the congregation, in the community. How would you, as the panelists, define affordable home ownership? Are there specific goals to affordable home ownership? How does that differ from other types of housing that the church, that houses of worship could be considering?
Good question.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question, right? But I'm glad you asked it. And I think it depends on the market that you're in. But generally speaking, HUD will define affordable as paying no more than 30% of your income. So let's, throw out some stats. So DC proper, not the DMV, the household income median, I couldn't resist, I wrote this down, is $104,000. The median income for a white family is $161,000. The median income for a Black family is $54,000. So overlay that with the average cost of a home sale in Washington, D.C. right now, 2023, is $650,000.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about affordability, I'm from Ohio, so it's different in Columbus, Ohio, than it is in Washington, D.C. But the bare essence of it is that you shouldn't be spending more than a third related to your housing, on housing, right? In terms of it being affordable baseline, which means that you need a very strategic and multi-layered approach to be able to build housing in this era that's actually affordable if the goal was to truly build equity. Someone told me a long time ago that a nail in a luxury single family house costs as much as a nail in an affordable townhome, right? So there have to be intermediaries to come in and assist, like Enterprise, with creative financing and products that help write down the cost to actually build equity and make home ownership affordable.
Let me add, and first I appreciate Ray's comment, and I should mention that I spent 30 years in the Washington area helping to found the Collective Empowerment Group in 1995 with Pastor Jonathan Weaver. And I know DC market very well, Brentwood. I knew Pastor Sharon personally, and my heart still grieves for him, along with Pastor Smith in Brentwood and some of the dynamic work he did there. So I want to inject this very subtle point, though I think it's important to me at least. When we were looking at pricing our homes in South Florida, we took Ray's point to heart. When you look at the median income, you got to factor in the fact that the median income for the Black family is not the median income for the white family. And you're building a house now to try to build equity into their life. So what we've done creatively is we've ventured with our builder partners. We're the Collective Empowerment Group. We brought on 7 builder partners in our infill lot development program. Dealing with the county and the politics has been, I used to have hair, I've lost it, okay? And,
Me too.
It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's necessary, because in doing so, we were able to get our partners to consider the cost of building along with what we were going to put out in profit. We all had to kind of share in the pain of building an affordable, cost-effective home that allowed us to get within the price lines of the guidelines of the county so that we can actually use that money to help bring the price of that house down enough for the inhabitant who is making much less money to be able to say, hey, here's 30% of my income. And we've kind of helped subsidize to some extent. The other thing that's important, the county said we could go up to a price level of, in Miami, $394. We may be in our future homes looking at maybe $325, but in our previous first 3 or 4 positionings, we were selling our homes below $300,000. So we were looking at about $279. People were walking in, and this is why this is the center of my, if I can say it, my radar and my navigator is how much Black wealth do we return to each individual? So that person goes in with $100,000 worth of equity, because we could have sold it for $394. We got in under the 300, and now they're walking in a enviable position, and hopefully they're somewhere around that 30% mark. But that's a hard thing to do, and it takes compromise on the builder's part, the developer's part, the county's part. Everybody's got to put some skin in the game to bring that thing in line, and that's, in a long story made short, how we went about doing our pricing thus far. And I don't think anybody's touching us in the Miami, South Florida area right now and looking at how we're going about doing that. And I need to inject one other piece. We're looking at micro units like Baltimore and Washington. We're beginning to think the density issue is going to drive us to build for sale housing and product that are smaller than the norm. That may mean micro condos, it may mean smaller duplexes, it may mean some others, but we increase the density, but they still own the property. And if you're buying a small house for $300,000 today and it's worth $600,000 tomorrow, who's going to be mad with you for that? You know, so that's kind of my logic, and I'll stop there and let others react to that.
Yep, Pastor, I will absolutely be in agreement with you and Ray, and without going into the research, Ray, I'm glad you shared that because we did the same thing, right? We looked at what the average incomes were, what the average home price. The average home price in Atlanta is $430,000, not as high as your 600 plus, Ray, in DC, but we have the same issue, right? And you know, one of the things that we had to do was to, start solving for it. And what we're hearing, I just heard it from Pastor Willis, we had similar types of things. There's three things that we did. As opposed to a traditional developer model where a developer goes out and buys and holds land, we wanted to find partners that already had land that were mission oriented to affordable housing. And so those partners generally held that land so that we could be able to do our thing. Now we're fully integrated. So we provide full development services. We have in-house construction, and we also communicate directly with capital, both for our construction, but also on the homeowner mortgage side of things. We're getting CRA supported mortgages into our pipeline. And those are, let me just run through those three things again. So you got, lower cost of land because you got a mission oriented partner. You're not carrying that cost. Most of the time, they're nonprofits that are holding this land and or faith-based organizations. Two, you've got mission oriented financing for your construction. So you're getting, 5 and 6%, even though prime is 8.5 today. So I don't think we have anything over 6.5% as far as debt at this point for construction. Third is using banks, right? Get them involved in your projects because they have a direct benefit by getting involved with their CRA products. But we don't only just use them for the mortgages, which is the easiest thing you can use them for. We use them for their down payment assisted programs. So when we build or develop our projects, we're talking to them on the front end about bringing what we call a CRA down payment assistance grant. So as a private developer, we're negotiating DPA in addition to what is already in our city. The housing authority, the city, other types of nonprofits have DPA that can be layered. And so, Pastor Willis, you talk about return of capital to that home buyer to be able to create wealth. We're doing that at a major level. So not just the equity that's created, because we're coming in at 80% to 100% AMI within our price point, but we're also making sure that we're doubling down on the DPA side. So we've got homeowners who are layering DPA. They're coming anywhere between $30,000 to $70,000 worth of DPA inside of a transaction. That's on the sales price, in addition to the equity that they're earning from a lower price based upon our development process. And so we kind of, that's our affordable housing model that we sort of, it's not unique. Those pieces are not unique, but I think how we put them together in order to drive affordability is.
Love that.
So if I can interject, just to shift the perspective a bit. Certainly we acknowledge the regulatory definitions, and thank you, Ray. You laid it out very clearly in terms of the research and numbers, and sometimes the numbers start to make me nervous because they get far too away from the humanity of this notion of home ownership. And while we definitely acknowledged all of those definitions and the structural needs, as as a faith-based entity, we actually feel compelled, if you can indulge me for a moment, to just expand beyond the traditional notion of what affordable home ownership means. And I think that we believe that this notion of affordable has to consider beyond the financial and economic aspects of home ownership and consider a multifaceted aspect that involves, can I afford home ownership physically, socially, educationally, psychologically? Does home ownership fit my lifestyle? If I am LGBTQ individual and I'm seeking affordable home ownership in the District of Columbia, I may not be able to take advantage of the options where the affordable home ownership is being built because I may not be welcomed in that community. So what price am I really paying, I guess, becomes the question when we consider the notion of affordable home ownership. And as a faith-based institution, as we are considering properties and considering where affordable home ownership can reside, I think we have a responsibility that goes beyond the real estate development, economics, financial component, and to really begin to think about how do we make certain that the culture and the environment of the community will attract the very people who need the home ownership and that affordable notion, and to make certain that the price individuals are paying is a price that is not going to harm them in terms of their humanity and their lifestyle.
Right. I want to build on that a little bit and sort of take us back a little to the idea of building wealth. In New York, we're just really built out and there's very little land to do home ownership. So we kind of take it where we get it, versus projects that we do, Veronica, like you're describing, further south, like in Prince George's County or Maryland, where there's more land, we can be more intentional in where we're building and what we're building. But one of the challenges that we've been encountering recently, especially from our regulators, is capping equity or the amount of equity a homeowner can gain when they're living in a subsidized unit. So in New York, for example, our term sheets cap equity at roughly 3 to 5%. And so as we think of building wealth, when our government partners, when our regulators are preventing that wealth building from happening, it sort of then almost takes the homeownership model and turn it on its head, where homeowners are more so becoming tenants as opposed to homeowners. And so the material difference between homeownership and homeownership becoming a financial and wealth building vehicle just eradicates. I'm not sure if we're seeing that or how many more localities we're seeing that in, but that's definitely a challenge that we're facing here in New York. Another challenge to the homeownership model, particularly as a wealth building vehicle, is the idea of CLTs, and CLTs also capping wealth and capping this sense of ownership that homeowners would have. We don't cap wealth building on wealthy families. They can buy a house at $200,000 and flip it the next day for $500,000. Why are we doing that to low-income families? Why are we doing that to moderate-income families? And then sort of building on the CLT conversation a little bit, why do we have to control and manage them? We have a federal government, we have a state government, we have a local government, then we have an HOA, and then we have a CLT. Like, how much more administration and burden do we need to put on low-income families just to offer them an opportunity at wealth the way the rest of America has had an opportunity?
Thank you, panelists. Great conversation on home ownership. I promise we'll come back to that, but I do want to pivot for a second and ask a question directly of Veronica around community facilities. I know Israel Manor, when you developed that project, it was mixed use, have a couple of different aspects to it. Could you tell us a little bit about that? How it's going? Is it still successful? And why you all decided to, do mixed use based on what the community needed.
Thank you, Tim, for asking. I'm chomping at the bit. Whoever wants to know, I want to tell them about. That's our premier project, the Morris L. Sharon Senior Community Life Center. It's actually one of our premier community facilities in the Washington, D.C. Jurisdiction. What brings it and what makes it premier, what makes it different at the time was we partnered in our vision of what we were attempting to do for the community. This loops back to the earlier question about needs assessment. Within our immediate community, which is in the Ward 5 area of Washington, D.C., we were suffering closures of hospitals. And the fact that individuals who might just get a burn on 4th of July had to go miles and miles and miles to be treated. We chose to develop our Community Life Center, 2 floors of which that Community Life Center actually houses a full service ambulatory medical facility operated by Unity Healthcare. And that partnership has just been phenomenal because we have served as that refuge, that oasis that sits right in the community for individuals who are insured, who are not insured, to actually receive not just health care, but I will say health education, urgent care, preventative care, health maintenance, emergency care right there in our facility, which, by the way, is connected physically to our church. So it gives us, as a house of worship, an opportunity to essentially show what our faith is about. And as people are coming to receive real services and real health care, we are able in turn to serve what we consider the mind, body, spirit, and soul of that individual. We also took the opportunity to, it's a 3-leveled facility. As I mentioned, Unity Healthcare services 2 of those floors, and the 3rd floor, Israel Manor Inc. owns and operates as the Capital City Hall of Distinction, which is a open facility that's available for meetings, events, community activities. It's available for rental. We've served, as a matter of fact, we've served Enterprise, we've served BET, we've served a number of organizations who are seeking to have their events within their community. And we're there, we're right there in the community. So we're really, really excited. One of our bragging points, I will say, is during the height of COVID, Unity Healthcare and Israel Manor Inc. partnered, and we turned our Hall of Distinction into a vaccination center. And it allowed for anyone who shall desiring a vaccination to come in and be vaccinated. And we served over 2,000 individuals with vaccination over a 6-month period of time. That particular initiative earned us the privilege and the honor of being visited by Vice President Kamala Harris, who in that process, she committed additional resources to community-based organizations serving the health needs of our traditionally underrepresented communities. So we're really excited about that, and we are staying in the game to continue to grow and build the facility in serving the ever-changing needs of the community around us. Thank you for asking that, Timothy.
No problem. Thank you. So going back to home ownership, and we touched on this a little bit about some of the obstacles to pricing home ownership units, but can you speak to other obstacles that houses of worship should be aware of when they're thinking about providing home ownership opportunities as a resource? And then, are there resources out there that they could tap into that can help them? I think, Ralph, you mentioned one thing specific that you were getting from the banks, from CRA, but are there other resources that they should be aware of and can tap into? I know, Pastor Willis, we might want to start with you. I know you have I know firsthand the obstacles that you go through with the county, but anything in addition, or you want to speak to specifically that house of worship should be aware of?
Well, in the earlier panel, I really have been taking notes, Tim. I was taking note here. It was Graham Singh who said, I think that we have to start by counting the cost. And I think the reality is, he also mentioned this, that you need to have an outside partner looking to be objective. That's what, as you know, the role we play is we are coming in being project managers, project management agreements with the churches. And we come in as an organization to try to encourage them to go through the polity. Now, this is where it gets tough. You're navigating the politics of the community, which is already bureaucratic. But when you look inside the church, these boards and these committees have to be on board. Sister Veronica made that point. It's an uphill battle. In fact, I remember Pastor Sharon Morris sharing, and over the years when this was a gleam in his eyes, along with a few other pastors, and they were navigating through these trustee boards and aggravating, if you will, to form the CDCs that needed to be formed, the outside organizations that the church controls, to do something like this. So we start there, trying to lay the groundwork for a smooth decision-making process, and hopefully getting those churches to look outside themselves and see what's in the need of the community. I'm unashamedly, I came into this not being a developer. I graduated Howard in 1987 with my doctorate, 85 in my master's. And I wrote about designing institutes for leadership development in churches because most of the Black leaders of our community at that time were coming from the churches. They were chair the trustee boards, chair the other organizations, and then now they're city council people, they're chair the school board, but they got their training in church. And I started there. So over the years, we've developed all these young leaders. I'm honored to say that David Bowers was perhaps in my first graduating class. And David himself wanted to do this. I had planned for him to be the pastor of the church that we founded and to take over after I left to come to Miami. But he said, no, I want to help this. So the beauty of this is that by training leaders to find their passions and their visions and not telling them what they need to do, we started seeing kids coming from the community joining our little church, which was, by the way, meeting in a middle school. And because they were coming in for our leadership programs, our summer camp programs, and their families were ecstatic. Well, why are my kids going to church and I'm not? So it was the kids who brought their families to church after that. And I'm just pleased to tell you, after 46 years of ministry, I'm still building kids. I haven't missed a summer, like Deion Sanders. I haven't missed a summer running a summer camp with young leaders. So I'm saying that these are the activities that you need to get engaged to build your program, build your ministry, then talk to your developer. Because if you don't have something with some juice going on in the church, you're DOA. And just building a house or building property is not going to save your church. So I'll stop there because, as you know, Tim, I could go on and on about this, but right. This is the issue. You got to make that real estate work for that church to do what it was positioned to do in that community. And I'll leave you with this. As a pastor, I always told my churches, I'm not called by God to serve a church. I'm called by God to serve the community in which the church resides. Mm. Because if I don't serve the community in which the church resides, then there will be no people streaming into the place. So you want to do that. And I applaud you, Veronica, going out, seeing what was no hospital in the area. See, that's meeting the need. So the people started streaming in and they didn't come because they knew God or Jesus Christ. They came because you were doing something. And hopefully you introduced them to God and Jesus Christ. So let me stop preaching now and move on.
Thank you, Pastor. Ralph?
Tim, I would just say access to capital, right? At the end of the day, capital fuels development. I think that all the panelists are in tune with sort of that critical path that you need, decision making, having the ability to do that. But and then proper, partnerships, developers like myself, we're truly the intermediaries, right? That are able to, put pen to paper, put nail to wood, right? And so at the end of the day, having a partner that you can align with, but also having a partner that has relationships. And in this space, they need to be non-traditional relationships, right? Because if you're just going to get bank financing, that capital could be too expensive and drive up the cost for that particular product you're trying to produce. They need to be connected with, other government programs, local programs is what I'm specifically talking about. Cities have programs, they need to be involved with that, as opposed to just a general contractor, right? A general contractor that is just hired to do a job and does not have these relationships can make it much more difficult for you. And ultimately you have to do more work to be able to bring these components into your development process. And so I would say access to capital, right, is the biggest thing that should be focused on and really, vet it when you are thinking about partnerships and things of that sort, because that's going to truly be the differentiator, I think, in these projects get done. Because you can have a vision, right? You can even have a good partner. And then once you get through that process, you've got to make sure that you design something to meet the need of the community as well as that is reasonable, right? And then ultimately that is financeable. So I'll say that.
I would add that, so if you have a site and you've decided that you're going to build affordable housing, well, then you have to decide whether you're going to build rental or home ownership. And we're talking about home ownership, so I'm going to highlight the challenges of home ownership. You have 2 acres, you can build 90 units of rentals, or you can build 24 units of home ownership. Right? The density isn't there when it comes to home ownership. And so that makes it difficult on a whole new level, where it makes the financing more difficult because there are fewer units to spread the cost out on. You're housing less people. So you're in one aspect, you're having less of an impact on the housing crisis by doing home ownership. But on the other hand, you're doing wealth building. We're doing a couple of homeownership units in New York City right now. We received hard cost estimates a month ago of $800,000 per unit for one homeownership unit, versus rentals are at $500,000 per unit. So then we have to figure out a $300,000 difference if we really want to do homeownership as opposed to rental. So I think the consideration before the organization, the church, is if you're doing homeownership units, you're doing it because you're very, very mission driven. If there's a different need in your church where you need a cash infusion or you need to do something else, then you're trading off homeownership with rentals. So I just want to sort of put that out there, how difficult homeownership is as opposed to rental. There's also not a lot of subsidy available from the different levels of government. And even if the subsidy is there, the calculation to maximize the subsidy is difficult. So if you're looking to maximize the down payment assistance program here in New York, you need to be a family of 8 making $180,000. You have to make a lot of money, but you have to be a very large family to make that money, right? Because that's how AMI sort of works. I want to come back to an earlier point also that was made about community facility spaces. I think as an industry, we need to less talk about housing development and talk about community development. especially when it comes to developing on church sites. If we were to take a project that we're sort of exploring, there's residential units above. The church is dedicating their land to build residential units. They have a very tired church, and so they're looking for a new church. So we're going to build a new church in the first floor as well. A church isn't just a place of worship or a house of worship. It's where families come when their homes are destroyed. It's where the homeless come when they are hungry. It's where the migrants come when they're bused across the country or flown across the country. It's where the cold comes during the winter. And so when we think of building a church space, we're not, and this really goes to many of our regulators, we're not just building a worship space, but we are building a community center that provides a lot of support services that we typically see government providing, but churches are now taking on that role in that position. So we should change the narrative of housing development to community development, especially when we talk of churches.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Arshad. We are closely approaching our time. However, I do want to give everyone one last chance to give any feedback or advice to houses of worship that would attempt to take on and replicate the things that you're doing around home ownership or community facilities. And succinctly, please.
I'll go. I'll try to be succinct. Just two things for me. When you do make the decision to expand your ministry footprint into, and I like what he said, into community development, make sure that you do two things. Choose your internal team wisely and your external team wisely. Regardless of whether you do rental or home ownership, reputational risk is absolutely huge. So you want to make sure that everyone on your team, especially externally, has high integrity and is philosophically aligned with where the church wants to go. And the second thing is hire a good lawyer. I can't say that enough, so I'll say it again. Hire a good lawyer when you're establishing your formation documents, and especially when you're going through a procurement of anyone you're letting into your family. Joint ventures don't end when the out sale of the last house is sold. There's warranty, and you're in the neighborhood, and that homeowner's in the neighborhood. So make sure that you do a good job in structuring your relationships and hire a good lawyer. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.
Well, I'm not a Baptist preacher, but I do have 4 points, and I'll be very quick. I wrote them down. My advice is fourfold. Honestly assess the readiness to go. The race is not won to the swift, but to those who endure through the end. Keep your eyes on the prize. Commit to the cause and not to the process or the person, because both will change and both will let you down, essentially, as the process is going forward. Begin with your end in mind. To Ray's point, you clearly need to strategize what's your sustainability plan, because the end is not when that last nail is put in the structure. That's when the work really begins. So sustain the work that you're doing. And success is not achieved on an island. I think both Pastor Willis and Ralph said the same thing. Seek and trust help. Seek expert partners. You cannot do all of the details by yourself. And build relationships within the community. I think on the prior panel, the individual said, know your neighbor. You might actually have to partner with that church down the street in order to accomplish what your vision is. So know your partners and build relationships within the community.
Thank you, Veronica. Anyone else before we?
Well, I would just say that the three-prong approach and commitment that we've taken on is based on the underlying principle: we must not do for others what they will not do for themselves. That's kind of our empowerment ethic. We look for three basic things. We want to arm them against despair and powerlessness, show them manageable action steps. That's a very critical, concrete thing that we do. Second, we want to bring relief based on the conviction that things will improve. And that subset is growth and improvement measurements must be put in place. And then finally, attention will help them focus and maintain faith towards sustainability. We find that these churches in these long-term projects lose faith. They get tired, they burn out. So we try to help them follow up by step-by-step listing outcomes and results that gives them measurable victories along the way, something to celebrate step by step. So those would be mine. And I would say to Azir, don't forget the micro units, my brother. In New York, you might want to look at building smaller, looking at those for sale affordable ones to give them a chance to buy in. So that may be an approach, since you can't bring $800,000 down to $600,000. That's my point.
Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time and keep
right.
us on track. Ashad, did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah, I just two quick points. Transformative change does not happen with one person. It goes back to the point that Veronica is making or made, and the point from panel one, which is join forces and have a larger voice. Churches are asking for different things and more things than they were asking for before, and those things are justifiable. But we need louder voice, and the way we have a louder voice is by having a collective voice. 100 units is 100 units, but 1,000 units really transforms a neighborhood. And the second point I'd like to close with is preach from the pulpit. Take your congregation to the land, pray on the land, emphasize the need for housing, emphasize the need for community, emphasize the need to work with other churches. This may not be your funding round. Your next door neighbor church might get funding before you do, but then your turn will be next. And then you'll make the way for another church after you. So make sure you're preaching the message from the pulpit as well.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Great way to end it. Great messages, great advice. I do want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank my co-moderator, Betty.